Good morning and afternoon and evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tatiana Show. I'm your host today, Joshua Shigala from Voltura, and sadly we can't have Tatiana on the show today. But for that replacement, we have none other than the unstoppable, the fervent, the amazing, the energizer of Bunny of Freedom, Lynn Ulbricht, on the show. Always a pleasure to have you on the show to give us an update on everything, not only to do with your son Ross, but also freedom in general. And yeah, welcome.
Thank you. That's my new title now, Energizer Bunny of Freedom. Love it. Love it. That's a good one.
Well, really,
you're
definitely unstoppable. You never run out. It's amazing.
Stop. Yeah, can't stop. Yeah. Anyway.
So yeah, tell us how are things going? How's everything with the case? I hear there's some new updates on Ross Ulbricht's case, and well, let's step back a bit. Actually, who is Ross Ulbricht for those listeners that don't know? Because maybe we have listeners that don't know the case.
Sure. Well, Ross is the defendant, or was the defendant in the Silk Road case, and was convicted of creating and operating the Silk Road, which was an online marketplace that was designed to protect user anonymity and privacy. So it operated on the Tor browser and used the little known at the time cryptocurrency Bitcoin. And the products on there, what was sold in exchange with Bitcoin was up to the users. It was up to buyers and sellers. So people could exchange all kinds of things and did. There were some things that were, I think it's important to say, there were things that were not allowed because Ross and the people who continued to run it were voluntarists, believed in voluntary interaction, no use of force, no violence. So things like, for instance, child pornography was not on the site, despite what you may read in some media, despite what people continue to say with no basis at all. The things they say that were on there is just sometimes jaw-dropping. Even the government doesn't say those things. But in any case, many things, no stolen property, no weapons, no things that harmed, could be used to harm. No brass knuckles, for example. It wasn't like it was a place to go for these kinds of things. But there were a lot of drugs bought and sold voluntarily on the site, which is what the government basically convicted Ross of and gave him, not for actually selling them, but for having the site, double life sentence with plus 40 years without parole. So the case has many problems in terms of the investigation, the corruption in the investigation, due process violations in the trial. You're saying I'm spokesman for liberty. Well, when you see what our government's doing in a very close up and personal way, it's shocking. I am shocked. I even now I'm shocked sometimes, and it's very alarming. So anyway, so that's who Ross is. There's a lot of information on freeross.org, and we're about to put up a very in-depth, very long, highly footnoted summary with information a lot of people don't even realize, and it really pretty much demonstrates what was going on behind the scenes. So we'll be putting that up, but it's not ready. It's taking a long time to put together.
Yeah. So we've also got on the show, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the case, but we've also got on the show Kevin McKernan, who has worked tirelessly in the cannabis side of science. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, and I always like to add into this story, an often undertold aspect of it is that many cannabis patients were relying on the Silk Road to get CBD to help their children with seizures. This is something where it's very difficult to move an epileptic child all the way to Colorado or any jurisdiction where it's actually legal. And so people were relying on these transactions to move medicine to kids in need. And that story is just often buried. And I think it's an important part of the Silk Road.
Absolutely. If anyone's seen the movie, oh, geez, what was it about the Cowboys selling?
Dallas Buyers Club.
That's the one, Dallas
Yes.
Buyers Club. And you know, these people were doing everything they could to deal with their sicknesses, trying to get, especially specifically to do with AIDS, to get medication in that were totally illegal because of the massive amount of regulation dealt with through the FDA. So these buyers clubs would pop up where people would bring in mainly actually just vitamins and minerals, but also certain drugs that were experimental, and bring them in from offshore and sell them at these clubs. And this was similar with the Silk Road. And you bring up a very, very good point there. Lynn, do you have anything to say to that?
Well, actually, I didn't even know that until Kevin told me that. And I think, whenever journalists talk about Silk Road, you never hear things like that, or about books or art or anything like that. It's always some hyperbolic, sensationalistic things, true or untrue. And even marijuana, which was the main product exchanged on Silk Road, small amounts, was barely mentioned at the trial. And only drugs were allowed to be told to the jury. They were not allowed to know that many other things were sold on Silk Road. Well, there are many things hidden from the jury, not to mention corrupt agents. But the picture that the prosecution and the media has painted of it, and I'm not defending some of the, granted, there are things on there that I do not endorse at all. But and I'm not defending it. But at the same time, it's very distorted what's being presented, and certainly distorted about who Ross is.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people, so many people in prison for marijuana, and it's mostly legal in most states now. So it just seems obscene that Ross's case hasn't been looked at again properly in terms of the sentence time, to say, hey, this guy built some software and that was it, really. When
Let me
it
just
comes
put something in about that, Josh, because Ross's good friend in there named Tony, he's served 13 years so far for selling marijuana. He's a life sentence for selling marijuana. The prison is a federal prison in Colorado. So here's this guy, nonviolent, selling marijuana, life. This is, well, I can go on and on about the criminal justice system, the money that's being made off of human lives, and the power that's being grabbed. But he's one of, I believe, 50 lifers serving marijuana in this country. This is an abomination. And he has another friend named Jose who he's in there because of the evil 3 strikes law, Bill Clinton's law, that one of the strikes was a residue on a dollar bill or something. He's got life. And Ross says, he's the nicest guy, super peaceful, and life sentences have quintupled since the drug war. It's like something like 17,000 now nonviolent people are serving life. And then if you add the sentences that are so long that they're going to die in there anyway, it's over 200,000. Oh, no. Is that right? Yeah, I think it's over 200,000. And this is terrible. This is like hideous.
Yeah, and it's an absolute destruction of life, even if they get out after maybe 10, 15 years, which is already an absolute abomination. Their life is screwed because they can't get work anywhere. They don't know how to fit into society anymore. They've spent 15 years surviving in some sort of a nightmare to then try to rehabilitate themselves back into society. And when we look at the prison system, really, it is a ridiculous form of rehabilitation. I mean, what are we living in? So I watched this story about people in the Philippines tying their senile parents to the verandas of their huts, or retarded children, because they sort of just lock them away out of society. And it just seems sort of similar. We look at that and think, oh, how uncivilized, how sick. But really, when I look at how we treat normal people who just sell a normal adult who's willing to only harm themselves, if harming at all, to absolute normal grown people making a decision by themselves to trade something that's really, when it comes to marijuana, absolutely harmless, if not helpful to some, to then give them such a sick sentence is just insane.
It's evil. It really is. Go ahead, Kevin.
Are they employing, I shouldn't even use the word employing, are they using prison labor in the Colorado prison system? Because I know some of these prisons can then utilize that labor, pay them something like 10 cents an hour, and then march into other people's markets and destroy certain labor-intensive businesses that are trying to make legitimate money, paying legitimate salaries.
Yeah, they're not doing that in that prison, but they do that. You're right. And yeah, it's true. So yeah, I mean, it's an abomination what's going on. I mean, it's kind of the dungeon model, which has been going on for centuries and centuries, and surely we can come up with something better. I mean, how about ankle bracelets for all nonviolent people so that they can be with their families? I mean, I go in there often, and I get to know the families and the kids, and I see the children being harmed by this, breaking down, crying, clinging to their dad. It is, and those children statistically are probably more likely to end up in the same place. And it's not helping anything. It's not like the drug war after 45 years and over $1 trillion has stopped people using drugs. It really hasn't. But it's a great jobs program.
In fact,
well, Kevin could speak to this. The pharmaceutical companies are one of the top 5 lobbyists against legalization.
They are, yeah.
Wonder why. Why.
There's an infamous company down, I think in Arizona, that funded $600,000 against the legalization bill in Arizona. They were also bagged for bribing doctors to prescribe more fentanyl, which is making the opiate epidemic much more dangerous and much more worse. And they're also putting a version of CBD through the FDA. So clearly they understand that CBD works and they're funding it. They're fighting the legalization of it and they're bribing doctors to push more opiates. I mean, this is a company, Insys Pharmaceuticals, and I think the CEO just got bagged and they're finally bringing him a little bit of justice. But that's the guy who gets caught. I think a lot of the other pharmaceutical companies are still doing this to some extent and not so blatantly and not getting caught.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a prison industrial complex that's lobbying for more harsh sentences so that they can fill their prisons. I mean, if they don't fill these prisons, that's probably 50% of their revenue stream that doesn't need to be there if you remove the drug war.
Over 60% of people in prison are nonviolent drug offenders and other nonviolent, but mostly drugs. And where I've moved to be near Ross because for the reason that Josh said before, I want to be a lifeline to him, to the normal world, because it becomes a culture and a world. There's guys in there who never have visitors. In fact, the visiting room's 250 seats, and there's usually 3 inmates. And it was a big day the other day. It was 13. It's whoa. But they don't have visitors. They have and it just becomes their world. And I can't let that happen to Ross. I can't. And he's strong. He is, and he's still himself. He's the other thing about it I want to say, because this is what it does to people, is it deprives them of their dignity. And Ross brought this up, and Ross has kept his dignity so far. He's he knows himself. He's like I say, strong mentally and emotionally. But you're become a number. But not only that, he's been referred to as freight. Guy. Freight's coming up, and Ross is like, "Oh, now I'm freight," and the guy's like, "Well, whatever." And then, or bodies, we've got 10 bodies. They're not human anymore. They're deprived of their dignity as a human being, and this erodes, who your sense of self, and all of these petty things that happen in this kind of enclosed place become big and important, and you lose. It just becomes your reality. It just does, and It's not they call themselves correctional, which you touched on too. It's not correctional. It's a criminal training program. Give me a break. Like you say, you eventually have to learn to survive.
Yeah.
And so that's what it is. It's horrible what's going on.
So Lynn, what's happening now in the case? We see we heard from you last 2-3 weeks ago about the Supreme Court. I'm not sure of the exact details, but I'm sure you could enlighten our listeners a little bit more about what's happening now. What are the latest on the legal front?
Yeah, well, I'll just do a little quick overview. Last December, Ross's legal team, who are some of the best in the country by everyone's told me that. We're very, very lucky to have them, but they believe it's a very important case. Williams and Connolly. They submitted a petition to the Supreme Court. Then in January, 21 groups from both sides of the political spectrum in 5 amicus briefs supported the petition to the Supreme Court. And now, just yesterday, we found out that it was really a nail biter because it was up for conference. So that's where they decide, are we going to throw a case out or not? And oh boy, I was just like, oh my God, I can't, it's just so scary. But they didn't. They didn't throw Ross's case out. It wasn't on the list of over 200 cases that they did reject. So we're like, oh, thank God. But then the lawyer said, well, it could be just relisted for next week, so we won't know. But we found out today it wasn't on the list for next week. So what probably is happening is that it's going to be held pending, and this is good. This is a good thing. Held pending another case called Carpenter versus U.S., which is addressing the same constitutional questions of the Fourth Amendment. In Carpenter's case, it is about whether the government, without a warrant, can track you on your cell phone, basically. On Ross's case, the Fourth Amendment question is, can the government, without a warrant, track all of your internet activity? And that's much more invasive when you think about it. You can throw your cell phone over here and go do whatever. Internet activity is very revealing of who you are, what political groups you're involved in, religious groups, sexual orientation, medical stuff, all on and on. And right now, under the current ruling, the current law or legal theory or whatever precedent, they don't need a warrant for this, or they can just go in and do it. And of course, they can also blackmail officials or others, judges, whoever, with what they've been surfing on the net. Who knows? We talked about this last time. And
exactly.
So it's a very important issue. And they've called Carpenter the most important Fourth Amendment case to come before the court in a long, long time. And now Ross's case, it looks like, is part of that same effort. And there's one other one, Kyra versus U.S. So it's a big deal. It's like, and I'm so glad that Ross's case can maybe help change this invasive law that's allowing the government to intrude on our privacy. So that's where it stands. So it's good news. It's good news. We're in the game still, the way it looks. Unless something unpredictable happens, we're in the game. And that's what was my biggest fear, because I wasn't sure what to do if the Supreme Court didn't keep us in the game. So it's been a good day for me.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
That is really good to hear.
I find it really ironic that a government that can surveil people so excessively isn't comfortable with an ankle bracelet, let alone they have to lock people in $75,000 a year cages. And when you look at what's going on in other countries that are going through our type of economic success, the prisons are emptying. You can see this in Holland. Their prisons are emptying out. They're not emptying out here, and yet we have this this medieval form of put someone in a brick room when you can track it's like those senators that were questioning Zuckerberg, like what hotel are you staying in tonight? They know exactly what hotel you're staying in tonight. The real question is, why are you tracking me? And you swore an oath not to do it, and yet here you are questioning me about it. I at least gave people a release to read. So I find it seems to be a political system that's so heavily purchased and bought that you can't reverse the obvious things that you need to do in society to fix it. The incumbents just run the show.
Yeah, and the hypocrisy is jaw-dropping. It really is. I mean, I could go on and on about their hypocrisy, and also they're asking Zuckerberg about illegal things on Facebook. I'm like, hello. So is he going to have to go into court? Is he going to have to face responsibility for what's on Facebook, including murders on Facebook Live? Is that okay?
That's a fair point. There are people who are selling cannabis and other things on Silk Road or on Facebook as well. But Zuckerberg
and
is
eBay and Craigslist and Amazon and all of that. So, yep.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point. I think what actually, this is a question that I've always wanted to ask, because I've a lot of our listeners, they aren't just passive people that just want to watch this show for entertainment. They are doers. They like to participate. What can people do to support the efforts of your crusade and your challenge, your mission to get not only Ross out, but to help American society and globally, actually, the message of freedom? What can people do to help?
Well, of course, one way the government crushes you is to bankrupt you, basically. So no individual, unless they're extremely wealthy, and I mean really wealthy, can fight them. So we always need, financial support. It's expensive to go to the Supreme Court and get the best lawyers and everything. So we always need help with that. But I understand that a lot of people can't do that. But there's other ways, or very much, there's other ways on freeross.org. There's a take action page. There's ways to spread the word on social media and other places to change the narrative, to point to the things that really matter. I'm also calling out for people with political connections. Sometimes things get done at high levels of the government and politics. And I've talked to some very sympathetic and wonderful representatives, even governors, people who, you never know who can maybe help. And so if actually Kevin's talked to some Congress people for us on our behalf. And so that would be helpful information. Also, and I wanted to touch on this, the NSA revelations that came out recently about the tracking of Bitcoin users and probably Silk Road. Hey, if anybody in the NSA or anybody who knows about this kind of thing that can prove or lead to proof that they were actually specifically tracking Silk Road, that could throw the case out. That could be, I don't know for sure, but I think that could really be a big thing. And it's illegal, and everything that comes from it. And of course, experts at the time of Ross's arrest, where they said, oh, this is how we found the server, they're like, that is the most gibberish lie, just ridiculous explanation by the government, under oath, by the way. All these experts are like, well, of course the NSA did it. And Ross's defense attorney brought that up. And the way the government handled that was they didn't say, no, they didn't. What they said, they didn't say no. They just they mocked him and said, oh, a boogeyman. The NSA is a boogeyman. Well, now we're finding out that from Snowden's revelations that it was happening. And, they're not tracking terrorists. They're tracking people who use Bitcoin, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
And several months before Ross's arrest. So it's urgently, quote unquote, tracking it. And Snowden even said publicly, it's on our website, it's unthinkable they weren't involved. We can assume they were involved. And of course, now these memos have come out, these classified documents. So if anyone has more information about that, that would be really good to have.
I also think it's good to spread the word about the trial as far and wide as we can, because I have run into people that are well-versed in the cannabis field who've actually spent time in prison and bought the story hook, line, and sinker that he had murder for hire hits out and the guy deserves it. And I've had to spend a lot of time correcting them, saying, no, you need to actually read into this. This guy had all types of corruption that occurred in the trial. They censored a tremendous amount of legitimate evidence from the trial, and he was basically more or less framed and given in a disproportionate sentence than anyone else for running a website. We're not seeing Zuckerberg or anyone else who's hosting websites like this become responsible for the actions of other people on their platforms other than Ross, which seems to me to be, and no one knows about that.
Yeah, well, it's one of the questions in the Supreme Court petition, besides the Fourth Amendment, is the Sixth Amendment, because they never charged Ross with murder for hire at trial. Just to be clear, that was not one of the charges. Yeah. It's not one of the convictions. There is an indictment in Maryland that's been sitting there for now pushing 5 years, not prosecuted, based on evidence supplied by a corrupt agent now in prison.
Yeah.
For some reason, they don't want to just drop that indictment. But the point of the petition was that the judge used the murder for hire allegations that were never proven in court, never even brought to court, to enhance this unreasonable sentence. And this is a violation of the Sixth Amendment right to a jury trial. And the reason our founders even created or wrote the Sixth Amendment was partly to stop rogue or corrupt or out of control judges from, to protect the accused from these people. That's why there should be 12 people who decide, not one. And who may be biased, may be ignorant, who knows. But that's a big deal too. And actually, Ross brought it up in prison to guys, and they were like, oh, yeah, that happened to me. That happened to me. I mean, it's been going on a long time in our courts where unproven, uncharged allegations are used by judges. And this is not right either. It threatens all of our right to a jury trial and a fair trial. But, this murder for hire thing, I had other people say, hey, they did that to me. They smear people, and then they don't charge you. So they don't have to prove it.
That's right.
And the media loves it. It's so exciting, And
oh yeah.
Just one other little point: murder for hire without a victim, because there was no victim, gets 10 years. So even if you think he did it, life, double life, with no victim, and even Curtis Green, who was the supposed victim of the murder for hire plot, that was a setup. They took pictures of Curtis Green as a dead person and stuff like that. The government did. He was supposedly the one that was targeted. He doesn't think Ross did it. He tweeted that publicly. Yeah. He thinks there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more people behind it. He doesn't think it was Ross.
Is that right? Wow,
yes.
I'd love.
It's right on the homepage of our website. You can see the tweet.
That's amazing. The thing is, I read the Dread Pirate Roberts's email, newsletters and things back in the day. And I remember thinking, wow, this guy is amazing. He is a real voluntarist, someone that does not believe in violence. It was almost like reading a monk's, some sort of Buddhist monk transcript or something. It was amazing. The philosophy of freedom and non-violence was so strong constantly. It was always this beautiful text of, why should we have, let's use, instead of using violence to enforce things, let's use incentives to have bad actors turn to good actors, and incentive structures using certain, and Bitcoin is a great example of that, actually. Bitcoin uses a lot of good incentives to make sure that bad actors don't act in the system. And Silk Road was the same, but his writings were amazing. And then when those murder for hire charges came out, I knew the instant that I heard it, and I've said it before on the show, but I'll say it again because we always have new listeners. The instant that I read those charges, I knew that they were fake. I knew that the guy that I've been reading these texts from would not do that, because philosophically his whole life mission with the service that was brought out and the writings and everything else was non-violence at its core. And to have this, I knew straight away. And because Ross or the Dread Pirate Roberts had this huge following of people that believed in non-violence and voluntarism, and it was epic. It was global. It was a huge movement at the time. Not like it is now. Now it's just some drug thing. But this was based on a philosophical thing. It was quite amazing to watch. And the murder for hire charges were really, and most people knew it that had half a brain. But what did it do? We saw so many of these followers turn away, just turn their backs on this guy because of these false, trumped up charges. And you're right, Lynn. This isn't the first time it's happened. You smear someone, everyone turns their back, and all of a sudden they're alone. So not only are you against the world's most powerful, richest government that prints money out of nowhere to do whatever the heck they want, but you've also got no support. And so you really, it's shocking. And I also, Kevin, spent a long time correcting people on these ridiculous charges that were brought forward and now dropped miraculously.
Well, yeah, they were never actually. Well, I guess you call it a charge, but it was an allegation or charge. But they dropped him 2 months after his bail hearing. They used it to deprive him of bail, and then they dropped him. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Why are you dropping them?
Yeah.
I mean, they've
because
got
they're
false
not true.
IDs in there. I mean, surely it's not because they're nice.
Yeah.
So, that should say it right there. They didn't charge him. It's not his convictions. And yes, people amazingly believe the media. The media is very willing, much of the media is a very willing mouthpiece for the government. And I've come to where I don't believe most of them.
Right.
All
Yeah.
right. It's like, it's really a sad state of affairs and scary in a way.
Look,
Yeah.
I see Ross Ulbricht really as a very similarly to Schwartz. Aaron Schwartz. We see a young chap who's a brilliant and gifted boy who have developed something and also philosophically put out there messages of freedom. And now you see, we in Aaron Schwartz's case, we saw the government or the schooling system, which was heavily backed by the state, really crush him down to the point of suicide. And in terms of Ross, we see him getting crushed morally, and his entire life is destroyed, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hope it's not his entire life. That's my goal, that it won't be his entire life.
Absolutely.
And ironically, the judge uses his peaceful philosophy against him. This is dangerous to mankind. We have to lock you away forever because you're spreading the word of peace.
Good point, Kevin. I was going to grab that too, because she said, we know that you started this site for philosophical reasons. She said this in the sentencing. And I'm just not sure you've given that up yet. So you're just going to have to live in a cage for the rest of your life, because this is a very dangerous philosophy of freedom and peace and voluntary interaction, and that just can't be allowed.
Wow.
That's a First Amendment problem here. And she said it. She knows why. She knows he didn't start to be a drug kingpin thug. She knows.
My goodness. So
I know. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but the person behind it was Senator Chuck Schumer.
Chuck Schumer.
Finance Committee. The judge, was recommended to her position by Schumer. Preet Bharara, his longtime counsel, was the head prosecutor. Ross was brought from California in the Ninth Circuit, where he was arrested, to the Southern District of New York to be tried in New York, Schumer State. I mean, on and on. So political. And it's not about drugs.
No, I mean, he's a political prisoner.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest drug seller on Silk Road got 10 years, and it goes down from there. And the guy who started Silk Road 2.0, who the government said was identical, was actually bigger, sold more drugs in a month, he's free. He never did any time. He did 13 days in custody, and he's disappeared. So they're not really worried about him being a danger. That's all more hypocrisy.
Didn't it come out that Schumer and even Sessions have large holdings in prison companies?
Oh, I didn't know that.
And Sessions very recently was on the record saying he wants to give people the death sentence for those who have more than 60,000 plants. And so this is kind of reverberated through the whole cannabis industry, because there are people out there that are growing that many plants now that it's legal in many states.
Oh my God. I didn't know that. And they have stock in prison. Well, yeah, but that's the evil too. Judges, prosecutors, and others can invest in prisons on Wall Street. So how is making money off of people not human trafficking? I have not had anyone explain that to me. Is our government involved in human trafficking?
Absolutely, they are.
I mean, and some of these private prisons have quotas, and they'll say to a town, hey, we need more people in here. We're going to have to close. And I can just tell you from where I live, because I've moved close to the prison, there's 11 prisons around here. And if they closed or even half emptied, this would be a major depression in this place. It's so many people work for them.
Wow.
It's it's enormous complex, just where Ross is, enormous. The money, it's just, and then there's the subsidiary industries like the vending machine, for instance, in the visiting room, where I have developed a very terrible addiction to Cheetos. Anyway, it's like, oh my God, what do I mean? But the same company owns all the vending machines for state and federal prisons in Colorado. That's a sweet deal. They're making tons. I'm telling you, those Cheetos aren't cheap. And yeah, I mean, there's all these subsidiary unknown little industries that, thrive on human trafficking.
There's also drug testing, which you'll find many of the enforcement agents can be owners in the drug testing business. And so urine testing is now being pushed into every job enrollment activity and everywhere they can find a place to put it. So there's interest there. And yeah, I just saw this on here. Chuck Schumer got $100K from private prisons. So he's been on their payroll.
Whoa. Wow. I mean, he got it as okay, I'll just Google that one. I'm going to tweet that one.
Yeah.
Believable.
Oh, that's a good point. So listeners, if you're interested in keeping up with a lot of this news, definitely follow @FreeRoss on Twitter. That's definitely a good place.
It's _Ross. Free_Ross. And then we have a Free Ross community Facebook page. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Instagram, Free Ross Ulbricht. Mm-hmm.
So just in this little break, I'd like to thank all of our friends and sponsors of the show. We have the Bitcoin CPA. Folks, if you are in the Bitcoin space and, we heard it here just before, they're tracking Bitcoins and they're you haven't done your taxes. I know we all hate taxes. It's just one of these things. It's rather do them than end up in prison. The Bitcoin CPA is a wonderful firm, company, and Kirk there does a great job making sure that all taxes are paid and that you're in the clear. Crypto Compare is also a great service to compare all your crypto. You can also check your Vaultoro holdings, Vaultoro.com, to trade Bitcoin and crypto to gold and back. So that's a fantastic service. I'm the CEO, full disclosure, of that. We've been running for 3.5, nearly 4 years, traded tons and tons of allocated bullion sitting in Switzerland in a high security vaulting facility, fully audited by one of the largest auditing firms in the world and fully insured. So you can jump in and out of allocated gold. And that means if the bank goes broke, you don't lose your savings. And if we as a startup go broke, it doesn't matter. Liquidators can't even touch your bullion. But so heading back, Kevin, now you've been organizing a conference for many years. Different it's an annual event,
it is,
right?
Yeah. It's called the CanMed conference. So the last 2 years we hosted it at Harvard Med School, and it's been tripling every year in interest. But it's more on the medical side of cannabis. So it's usually 30% physician attended. We have continuing medical education credits that physicians can get. So we're trying to inform physicians about the benefits of cannabinoid use and where they can be deployed and what are the legal challenges around doing so in the current environment. And it also touches on a bit of personalized medicine and genetics to try and see if we can really refine this, because we don't believe the FDA model works anymore. The FDA model was invented back at the thalidomide debacle back in the 60s, and it's a carbon paper institution that frankly could use some of this peer-to-peer type of technology that we have for rating, whether it be drivers or doctors or what have you. We have tools now to rate drugs differently than an $800 million trial that you have to perform at the FDA. So we don't, while some cannabinoids will probably get through the FDA, some already have. We don't disparage anyone trying to do that. We just think there should also be a nutraceutical path for people to explore, that we shouldn't have to wait years for these trials. We shouldn't let the cost of those FDA trials get reflected in the drug cost either, which is probably going to happen with all the drugs that go through the FDA. So we're trying to change the paradigm a little bit and speak about all of that complexity at CanMed. So it's going to be at UCLA in October 22nd to 24th. Lynn's going to be speaking about some of the impacts of the drug war. I think it's very important that the physicians and any of the folks that are involved in the political movement on this hear this story, because when I first heard it, I had the same reaction that you had when I read those murder for hire things. I was like, whoa, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like the person I read about. But for probably about 3 weeks, I had it in my head as kind of, well, maybe, maybe not, until more and more data came out showing that it was all fraud.
Exactly.
But the media has done a wonderful job planting that seed and never turning it over. And so I think conferences like this are important. And I also think platforms that help decentralized news agencies are very important. And so I've been viewing Dash as one of those lately. So Dash has recently funded Ben Swan. They're funding, I think, Truth in Media now, and a couple other agencies that are doing great work in the space. I think the Free Thought Project ended up getting funded very recently, and Luke Rudowski's group got funded. So this is a cryptocurrency that's minting a free press, which I think is a really, really attractive place to be. And we're actually thinking about ways we can utilize that to mint basically a free science press, because right now peer review is broken as well. Very centralized, and it has all types of defects. About half of the papers can't be reproduced right now. And if you look at the actual impact score in a journal, it's inversely correlated with its retraction rate. So really impactful journals have a higher retraction rate. So that tells you the whole peer review system is also broken, and cryptocurrencies can probably change that. So Dash is actually the lead sponsor for CanMed this year, because we wanted to have a real cryptocurrency focus this year for CanMed, because it's playing such a pivotal role in managing the science, perhaps bringing in funding to the field, and perhaps even managing some of the banking problems they have in the field. So I don't know. We're excited that there are tools available that can potentially invert the tables that we're seeing laid down in front of us.
Wow.
Let me put in a couple of words about because last year Tatiana and I went up to CanMed. Actually, we were driving up, and I'm like, "Hey, Tatiana, this is just like Legally Blonde. We're these two blondes going to Harvard." I'm like, "How did this happen?" You know, it's like I'm like, "Wow, this is really cool." But it was quite an amazing conference. There's experts, PhDs, MDs, and people from all over the world who are brilliant, and you can learn so much, and some of the presentations of the work that some of these doctors have done with their patients, and seeing the incredible results. And then when you think that this research is being hampered by the U.S. drug war, it's just horrible. But it's a really interesting kind of different conference, and so I'm sure it'll be just as fabulous this year. And there's a lot of very interesting people to meet from all over the world and hear from. So I was very honored to be there last year and this year. And so just wanted to put in a plug for that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there are Raphael Mechoulam, who's a gentleman who discovered THC back in the 60s, always gives a great presentation on this. So you'll see many of the folks who have been pioneering this research. A lot of it's been done overseas because we can't get it done here. And so there's I'm hopeful that we'll have another Dash proposal funded that we might be able to showcase there. But one thing we're going to experiment with is whether we can get the Treasury to actually, at Dash, to perform a scientific project to basically sequence a cannabis genome for IP purposes. There's a couple cannabis patents that are now issuing. So despite the fact that cannabis is illegal federally, you can still patent this plant and certain forms of it, which seems completely ridiculous.
That is ridiculous.
But they're issuing them, and they're issuing them very, very broadly. In fact, the funny thing is they're issuing them, but you can't actually prosecute them until it becomes federally legal. But you can still hold your patent and maybe run around and raise money with it. But they issued one that basically captures all plants that make CBD and THC. Okay, so THC people know is a compound that tends to get people high, but it definitely has some medical benefits. CBD is known to be non-psychoactive. It's probably non-psychotropic. It is in fact an anxiolytic, but it works in epilepsy, right? And this one is deemed to, you can take it and not get high, and it can help children. And so that one is deemed to be non-controversial. Yet the plants that make both of them are now owned by a patent. And many in the field believe this patent is actually, there's probably prior art out there that isn't well documented and that the USPTO can't find. In fact, we believe the natural state of the plant is to make both. It's only due to prohibition that people started breeding for really high THC levels, because it was prosecuted based on pound. And if you got caught with a pound, you get X amount of a sentence. So people wanted to make the THC levels really, really high. Same thing happened in alcohol prohibition. So the natural state of the plant, we think, makes both. We just don't have really good prior art to put in front of the USPTO. So what we're proposing to do is actually sequence a plant like that makes both THC and CBD, put it public on Dash Drive, which is a new drive system they're planning to release towards the end of the year, where the master nodes bolt on terabytes of drive space and can start doing like a Filecoin, if you will, on Dash. So now you've got a platform where you can move money around if you need to. You can incentivize a peer review properly, where the money actually goes to reviewers, not to the journal who steal the copyright.
Wow.
And you can put the data there too. And so what if we did this? What if we actually demonstrated to the world that you could get funded in 5 months, sequence a genome, and publish it all through cryptocurrencies and never touch the copyright system?
Oh, it's just magic. It's just sensational. I love it.
So I'm hopeful it will go through. Any masternodes out there, please hit me up with any emails if you have any questions about it. We'd love to put it forward. We think it's probably only going to be about $99,000 to get the whole thing done. It's a lot of money, but we think it's a good cause. It will put this thing public. It may challenge some of the IP claims that are out there, so it's more broadly available. And at the same time, I think it will present to the world that we can actually be an arbiter of truth without having points of centralization that distort it, whether that be the news media that's doing the horrible things that we're seeing to Ross, or whether that even be happening in the scientific field. But many people look to the scientific field as some type of beacon of truth. You put a white lab coat on somebody, put them in front of the TV, and you can pretty much convince anybody that global warming is or isn't happening. The reality is much dirtier than that when you look at the sausage of actually making these papers. And when you're typically putting them through peer review, they're anonymously reviewed. I mean, in most cases. And this is kind of like just inviting trolls on Twitter to review your work. The people who are doing this don't have a financial incentive to do it. So they're usually the least employable people that are running the reviews. What you really want to do is change that incentive model so there's actually a pricing signal for good reviews and bad reviews, extensive reviews and short reviews. And we think that can all be done on crypto now. It's just we just need a good project to kick it off, and we think that the cannabis genome would be ideal.
I want to bring it back a little bit to let people really understand that don't understand crypto. This is really what you've just said there is really, for me, phenomenal. I mean, we have right now a thing called a blockchain, a thing it's like a digital organism that lives. It just, once it's kickstarted, once you've pulled that chain of that chainsaw, and it just goes, and it's sitting there living, and it's kind of a mathematical perpetual motion machine almost, and because it's incentivized in all the right directions to keep on going. Now, the original blockchain was just paying out miners that were securing, these people called miners that were basically doing maths to secure this blockchain, to keep it alive, to keep it going. So first of all, we saw the first mathematical thing, almost living thing, paying humans to secure it for itself. So that's almost, first of all, a crazy concept. And then now Dash has taken this to the next step, where the blockchain not only pays miners, but pays into a fund that then owners of that cryptocurrency can vote on certain proposals. So every 10 minutes or whatever it is, Crypto Dash go into this fund, as well as paying miners, as well as paying some other things. But then that fund gets bigger. It's called a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, and this DAO gets bigger and bigger, full of capital. That then all the token holders that hold Dash can vote. Well, actually, masternodes, but let's just keep it simple. They can vote on whether a proposal goes through. So anyone can write a proposal. If you think you will do something that aligns with the Dash community, or to promote Dash, or whatever it is, you can write a nice proposal up, send it to this decentralized autonomous organization, and people all over the world anonymously will vote to let some Dash, release some Dash automatically to an address to fund a certain project, and they could turn that off as well. So we have Kevin that submitted a proposal to do what he just mentioned, and hopefully that will go through. And this is for me such an amazing step in the evolution of funding models because we don't now need to go to a centralized authority like a hedge fund. We can actually go to a fund that's owned by a group of people with a certain aligned philosophy and get certain things funded, and that's just great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's really important in the cannabis field just because we have struggled to get it funded for so many years. And here we have a tool that you get a community of like 4,700 masternode owners to actually review this and give you feedback and give you peer review in many ways as to how to change it, how to make it cheaper, how to make it better, how to make it more impactful, and then ultimately decide on whether it gets funded. And it happens every month on a heartbeat. And you have to put 5- up to apply for this, which I think is actually an important incentive to sharpen your pencil and not throw trash into the network. It's an anti-spam mechanism, which I think is working right now. But it is it's a fascinating thing to see, particularly if you've been through getting funded by government, which I have been through. This really changes the tables. The process of getting funded by a government oftentimes can take you hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not $1 million, just to have enough preliminary data to apply for a grant. And that whole process can take a year. And then you spend half your time updating how the grant is being, how it's performed. And then ultimately publishing it can take you another year. So the entire project cycle time can be like 2 to 3 years. We could probably compress it to 6 months with something like crypto.
Oh yeah, there's so much dead wood and leaching in the old systems. In actually most old systems, there's just these parasites that suck away at the lifeblood of really important things like science. I mean, the sciences are really suffering from a lot of this. But then, of course, you have the regulatory nonsense on top of all that.
Somebody's making money.
Yeah,
that's what I always look at it. It's like $1 million to well, where's that going?
Yeah, well, I would love to see Dash fund some help with Ross's case as well. I think that's also aligned. We should definitely look at that.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of the conference, Kevin, when is it? How do people find out more about it?
Conference, I'm sorry, can you guys still hear me? A little bit of background noise here, but the conference is in October at UCLA, and it's October 22nd to 24th, and it's expected to be about 1,500 people. There is a Dash. We're going to have a cryptocurrency parallel track as well, so Dash is sponsoring that. Dash has also been great in getting our Cannapedia system moved over to their blockchain. So we do notarize cannabis genomes for people for defensive IP purposes, and that's now migrated from Bitcoin to their blockchain. We've got a couple other crypto folks they're coming to speak as well that are just signing on as we speak. So it should be a good mix of crypto and cannabis science.
That's fantastic. So what is the latest?
Mm-hmm.
What is the most exciting cannabis science that you've seen recently come out of the space, Kevin?
Well, we've been doing. There's a lot of exciting stuff with people finding genes that relate to the terpene expression, which I think is a really important and unexplored part of the field.
What is that?
So the compounds that the plant makes that people study most are the cannabinoids, and there's another whole class of compounds called terpenes that they also make. They're what give the plant the actual smell and the aroma, and many of them are in fact medicinal as well. We just haven't been paying as close attention to them. Likewise, there's another set known as the flavonoids. You'll notice that the plants sometimes turn purple, and there's something called anthocyanin in there that is a strong antioxidant. But the terpenes are what give it smell, and it produces probably 200 different terpenes, and the list just keeps growing. But there are things that you might know, like limonene you'll smell in lemons, and myrcene come from mangoes, and beta-caryophyllene comes from like peppercorns, and these things all have been shown, and terpinolene comes from sage. These things have all been shown to act on different receptors in the human body. And so we're now paying a lot more attention to what's the background of the plant. What type of terpenes does it make, and what type of cannabinoids does it make?
So is this around the aromatherapy sort of side of things? Is that?
I mean, that gets a bad name, but these compounds, when people either inhale them or ingest them, are active. Some are AKT inhibitors. Some are cannabinoid 2 receptor agonists. So they have a really diverse profile, and so. We need to better understand that when they end up in extracts, when they end up in anything that's a whole plant medicine. So that area is really exciting. We've been doing a lot of work in microbial detection, because most of the states that are rolling out regulations are mandating that certain microbes get tested for in cannabis. And there is a legitimate reason for this. There are people with epilepsy taking this, and they can't get E. coli or salmonella that will trigger fevers and seizures. And then there have been a few cases of people that have gotten that are usually immunocompromised, but they've gotten aspergillus in their lungs. There was a recent case of a cryptococcal meningitis outbreak in Bakersfield, California. And so, like any food, this is one that you often inhale and take in different routes of administration. So you have to be a little more careful with the microbial tools that you use and what you're testing for. We're doing all that with DNA now. It used to be done on these old Petri films. And so we've been seeing we had 100% growth in 1 month as California turned on in this spring. So California is now going live, and they're anticipating there's probably 10 to 50-fold more demand for laboratory testing than there is supply, and that's going to be the bottleneck as California legalizes is laboratory testing. And so we're trying to get people on these really scaled up tools that we know we can automate. We use these tools in the Human Genome Project. They're highly parallelized, and that means DNA-based methods are most likely going to grab a foothold in California and Canada and many of the other states. So that area is always fascinating to us, because when you explore the microbiome of cannabis, you realize the complexity of what's going on there. There's all types of different fungi and microbes that are growing on it and altering the chemical expression of it and altering the safety profile of it. And if you don't really have that under wraps, it's going to be hard for you to grow a very healthy crop that's going to pass.
So, a lot of bad press with weed and schizophrenia comes out. Do you think there's a possibility that somehow there could be a cure hidden in that as well?
So the schizophrenia, like the disease itself, has the same type of scientific publication in cannabis. There are publications that demonstrate cannabinoids as a cure to it. And there are other forms of schizophrenia that might be genetically predisposed, that if you have schizophrenia, you're likely to induce it with drug use. And that doesn't just imply only cannabis use, although cannabis use can certainly be a trigger. But what you can see in the demographics of this is the rate of schizophrenia hasn't changed. It's been below 1% for the country for a very, very long time, yet cannabis use has been going through the roof. And so we're not seeing an increase in that. So that might imply that if there's a genetic predisposition to schizophrenia, it is at a basal rate, and that risk will always be there, and we should better understand it. There are some variants in the human genome that have pointed toward this. There are some variants in the AKT pathway and a couple other genes that may be playing a role in schizophrenia risk with cannabinoids.
Oh, that AKT pathway, I'll tell you.
It'll get you every time.
It'll get you every time. Yeah, so I find it fascinating that weed, especially to, like you said, that people that are genetically predispositioned to schizophrenia could be an acceleration of that predisposition. And I've always wondered if really being able to study that cause and effect would allow us to better understand schizophrenia as a whole, because I have unfortunately people in my life close to me who have suffered from schizophrenia, and it is just a shocking disease. It's a very terrible disease, because not only is it not understood, but friends and family end up turning their back because you just turn into an a-hole. And it's very, very hard to deal with these people because they become extremely negative and they're just a-holes at you. So it's a horrible, horrible disease. So this was another thing with the drug war, is that it's really stopped proper investigations and science into these compounds. We also see this with the new sort of, I guess, how would you say, this new excitement around microdosing LSD and some of these other things, where people are who are doing this have got access to amazing equipment in universities, and so are testing a lot of these things out on themselves in terms of microdosing them, and finding amazing studies and amazing new I guess I don't know. I mean, you would know more about this than me, Kevin. But
yeah, well,
here's
another story of where government has come in and made this much worse. So in cannabis, most of the funding for cannabis that was available was through an organization known as NIDA, which is National Institute for Drug Abuse. So their charter is to find abuse, not to find benefit. And they funded one organization at University of Mississippi to only grow one type of cannabis that had THC in it. So the vast majority of literature is on THC. And when there are correlations with THC inducing schizophrenia, many people attribute that to all cannabis. Well, when you look at the data on CBD, you see a different effect. You actually see CBD might mitigate schizophrenia. And this has been kind of omitted from the entire study history here. So the same thing's happening with LSD, and the same thing's happening with MDMA and psilocybin. All of these compounds have shown to be very tolerable. I mean, they have a very wide therapeutic index. They never kill anybody. You never get overdoses on these drugs, and they're showing a lot of promise in PTSD and cancer-based depression, and even in schizophrenia. But studying them takes an act of Congress, and so. We've got to find other ways to do this, because there's just far too many people that we're seeing, succumb to the opiate epidemic for, chronic pain or for PTSD, when many of the drugs that are in fact illegal that maybe were traded on the Silk Road are far safer. And that unfortunately may take a very long time to reverse, but there are people in the crypto space that are helping out here. I think there was a Pineapple Fund that just funded MAPS to try to get MDMA through the FDA for PTSD, I believe. And so we're starting to find folks in this space who are well-read and know what's going on in the world, stand up and fund the projects so that they can move forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of anecdotal. I mean, my friend of mine broke her arm. She was in horrible pain. She had to have surgery, and they gave her opioids for the pain, and she, upset her stomach a while, and then somebody gave her edibles, and she said it was great. It stopped the pain, allowed her to sleep. It was, really good. And so instead of taking opioids, which of course we know is a huge problem, and apparently opioid use has gone down in states where marijuana is legal, like Colorado, she was able to take this edible. And also, I know someone who is I don't know if he's schizophrenic, bipolar, whatever, but to try an effort to get off his meds, which have a lot of horrible side effects. He was taking CBD oil, hemp-based, and it was helped him tremendously. So, I mean, Kevin probably has volumes of anecdotal evidence, but the fact that there's nothing in the Constitution, no authority whatsoever to say that any of these things should be illegal. And, to stop alcohol, they had to pass a constitutional amendment to make it illegal, and another amendment to make it legal again, because, of course, prohibition never works and all that. And to think of something that has no real authority that's stopping and really causing people not only their lives in danger, but their quality of life is appalling. It's
Yeah, the thing to add to that is the FDA regulates 25 cents out of every dollar. I mean, it's an enormous reach that the organization has, and none of these drugs will get through they'll have a hard time getting through the FDA because of the patent system. You can't afford to get through the FDA system unless you have a patent to remonetize that long process. And the final thing on this is that they have this thing known as the PDUFA Act, where the FDA defrays their costs of evaluating drugs by getting donations from the pharmaceutical companies. So this is not regulation the way anyone in the crypto space would imagine aligned incentives. This is something where the FDA, likely when it makes mistakes, gets more funding. And so we really got to change. Like a
prosecutor, they get promoted when they violate the law.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not on. So, folks, we've unfortunately hit the hour mark. I would love to keep on going. This is an absolutely fascinating conversation. Kevin, how can they find out more about what you're doing, the amazing work that you're doing?
Well, you can look us up at medicinalgenomics.com. And there's also a CanMed. If you Google CanMed, you'll find the CanMed conference. And if you're interested in any of the Dash blockchain work with cannabis genetics, that's at a place called Cannapedia, spelled with a K, due to some trademark issues we have right now. It's hard to get things with a C spelled cannabis trademarked for other bizarre reasons. So Cannapedia.net, Medicinal Genomics, and CanMed are the three places.
Well, thanks very much for coming along today. And Lynn, how do people find out about everything Free Ross?
Yeah, freeross.org is our hub, and there's tons of information, and there's going to be more. It's a work in progress. So yeah, visit freeross.org and please share and like and follow, all that stuff. So it would really be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank all the people that have already followed Free Ross.
And contributed, which has gotten us to where we are now, which is knocking on the door of the Supreme Court. It's been a grassroots effort. It really has. And we're very grateful to everyone who supported us. I mean, stood by us, walked beside us, you two guys being two of them, and great people. I've told Ross, the silver lining in this is all the great people I've met. I just want him to meet you all.
Right,
anyway,
right.
Yeah.
Well, he will, I'm sure. Yes, thank you very, very much to everybody. And if you want to stay in touch with me, I am at Vaultoro. That's VAULT. That's like a gold vault, and oro, like Spanish gold. Vaultoro on Twitter. And you can also check out vaultoro.com if you want to trade Bitcoin and gold. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll see you next time on the Tatiana Show.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
You too.
Thanks, Kevin.
Good to see you guys.
Ciao. Ciao, Lynn.